2 bikes. It's like I gotta jump over this puddle.
Listen to my bike.
We're so ready. Welcome to Epic Evo versus BC40, but not exactly what we were planning. It's just been raining nonstop since we got to North Carolina. 4 days of straight rain. Originally, we were gonna do like some time testing, but we don't think that's a good idea.
You can't go fast.
Yeah, so we're gonna ride the bikes back to back still, just as a refresher. And we're gonna sit down somewhere not wet, and I'm gonna talk about both bikes head to head. Dib, are you having a fun? This has been a video I've been working on for, I guess the whole year now. I use both these bikes as my A race bikes all season and have put more miles on them than any other bike I've had in recent memory. Just to kind of go through some of the events I did on the BC40. It was our Gravel Doom War Daddy I raced this bike in Kentucky a lot. Kind of like the Bluegrass Mountain Cup races, a couple races in Indiana on it. I raced freaking Mohican on the BC40. That was a crazy mud rain race too, so another major one. This is the second Epic Evo that I have owned. I got the very first Epic Evo that came out, the very first model year of that bike. I had the green one. Shout out to Motion up in Fishers for helping me get that bike during that time. Initially, I set out to do a review, and whenever you're talking about both these bikes, they look very similar and they are very similar. I was just gonna go off of memory and talk about my experience with the other Evo I owned, comparing it to the BC40. And one day I went out and rode somebody else's Epic Evo. I just kind of felt like, oh hey, this bike's really cool. And kind of in my head I was thinking like, I really want this to be like a really good comparison between the two. And so I ended up I had an Epic with the Brain at the time, and I ended up selling that and switching it out for this rose gold Epic Evo. And now I have definitive back-to-back riding on both bikes. The Epic Evo was raced twice. I raced it Margie Gasick up in Marquette, and also the Pisgah 111, which actually ended up being one of my best race results I've ever had on that bike. I was able to finish 7th overall and just had an awesome day out there. So I now feel super qualified to tell you my thoughts on these two bikes, and definitely very fresh on my mind. So let's get into it. I will be giving my thoughts and which bike I think is better and why, but if y'all are looking for anything bike related, check out thebicyclestation.com. We have tons of products and more stuff getting added all the time. We're starting to get this whole e-commerce thing figured out, so hopefully y'all enjoy our website, and please let us know if you have any feedback for it. All right, I'm gonna pull this one out of the way. You can focus. This is the Specialized Epic Evo, and your finger's in front of the camera.
No, it's not.
Oh my god.
It's literally not.
I can see it.
Well,
Careful.
I don't see it.
Careful.
On the footage.
All right. You ready?
I've been ready. I've been filming.
So this is the Specialized Epic Evo. If you're watching this video, you have seen this bike in person, most likely. It has been a dominating force in the XC mountain biking scene for the last 3 years. This bike came out in 2021, has just been universally loved by everybody mostly. One of the first ones to really get this 120 travel XC race bike thing. There's other bikes that kind of came before it in in this category, I think Specialized released the bike that had the most impact upon arrival. I mean, this is a mass market bike that, like I said, you go to the trail, you're gonna probably see one of these out while you're riding for good reason. Specialized released this as the more gnarly kind of bike. I don't know if they really intended it to be the default race bike like it became, but they kind of accidentally made one of the best XC racing bikes ever. And that's evident from just like how many races it's won and how many people are still racing it to very good results. This bike has 110 in the rear with a 120 fork. I have done a dual 3-position remote lockout on this bike. Whenever Specialized released the Epic World Cup, everybody was confused. It's like, okay, why aren't the World Cup racers racing that? The bike's literally called the World Cup. A lot of them were still racing this Epic Evo, and whenever I made the decision to buy an Epic Evo to do more long-term testing on it, I made sure to invest in this 3-position lockout setup because that's the way that all of the racers were using the bike. Specialized is known for the FSR suspension. That is kind of their calling card for mountain bike design. This is a flex pivot, but it still has the same kind of DNA of what an FSR suspension would be like. And what it's like, if you've never ridden a Specialized bike, is it's really squishy. It's super plush, comfortable. It's not known for being the most efficient suspension out there, but it is very, very, very good whenever you're just kind of blasting through wide open trail. Where this suspension isn't as good is whenever you're trying to put a bunch of power into it. It sags a lot under power, but not if you connect the cables to the suspension. RockShox and SRAM recently went with a 3-position lockout on their suspension, and this pedal mode unlocks the full potential of this bike. Without the pedal mode, this bike kind of is lacking in the efficiency department when compared to like a more hardcore, fully dedicated XC race bike like the Specialized World Cup, the actual Epic with the Brain, the Super Caliber, the list goes on and on. The lockout remote though, you now have coverage for any kind of terrain that you might encounter. Honestly, whenever you're racing a race like Margie Gasick, you want that squishy suspension, you kind of need it. And so it becomes a superpower of the bike in a lot of ways. Instead of it just being inefficient, I'm not saying it's not efficient, but it's not as efficient as other bikes. Instead of it just being inefficient or locked, you now have a mode where if the trail is more mellow, you have a better pedaling platform for those sections. And it really opened my eyes up to the reason why this bike was raced over the World Cup by Specialized racers. It can literally do anything. I've now piloted it to one of my best results I've ever had on a bike. The other big factor in why this bike is so beloved is it's still to this day the lightest weight full suspension frame you can buy. I'm pretty sure that this frame is 1,600 grams. We're not gonna weigh anything today because I'm pretty sure my wheels are full of water from our trip. This bike weighs about 2300 pounds. I've weighed it at 22 pounds. With these bigger tires, it's not as light possibly, but it's winter, so we're rocking the Wicked Wheels. By the way, Wicked Wheel, check it out. Order yourself some at thebicyclestation.com. This is kind of my new favorite tire as of late, especially for kind of the wet season here. This bike's been out for a while and it's still kind of at the top of the mountain. This is still a relevant bike that people want, and I think that's super impressive from my point of view as a bike shop owner. People still want this bike. It's kind of at the end of its run. I kind of view it as a bike that cycling people will remember for a long time. I think in 10 years we'll still be talking about like, oh yeah, remember when Specialized released that 2021 Epic Evo? It kind of changed mountain biking for better, in my opinion. I mean, without this bike, we wouldn't have a lot of different bikes from other manufacturers, including the one we're going to talk about in a second. Before we move on to that bike, I do want to talk about things that I would like to see improved upon. And it's kind of a short list. I'm excited to see where this bike goes. I don't know what it's going to be in the future yet. One of the biggest problems with this bike is the cable management system. If you own this bike, you know what I'm talking about. It's never going to fit in there right. I've never been able to get it in there all the way. It's honestly just, if you have this bike, like, you're probably laughing to yourself. yourself right now, but like there's no way to get this freaking piece of plastic to like stay in the frame. And so hopefully Specialized can do something to correct that. It's kind of annoying, honestly. And also even putting it in there is hard. It doesn't fit in there. So if you ignore it and take it out of the frame, the cables just rattle around and hit the frame entrant hole there. Some of the other negatives about the Epic Evo I'm going to save for the direct comparison part of this video, but let's get into the standalone BC40 side of things. Allied BC40. This bike came out a little bit over a year ago. For us as the bicycle station, it was the most important bike of 2023 for us. We can't thank everybody enough for reaching out and buying one of these. I think we've sold 25 of them at this point. And if you're out in Brown County, here in Indiana, you likely will see one of these because everybody just loves it. Everybody who's gotten on this bike has absolutely loved it. And so thank you everybody who's gotten one from us. Let's get into why. Allied BC40, a 120 front and rear. It is a flex stay just like the Epic Evo, and it honestly, without the Epic Evo, I don't think we have Allied BC40. Let me just say that out loud. I don't think it would exist without that bike. I don't think I've ever had a bike where you get on it, you just feel so locked into the bike. But the way that this geometry is designed, I've never been on a bike where I just felt like I was more connected to it. The suspension on the BC40 is really interesting. I have now tried this bike. I've had like 4 or 5 different suspension setups on it. Current setup is the stock 120 no lockout. And you can buy them any way you want from Allied or from us, whatever you want. Like we just switch it out and it's no big deal. So in its stock configuration, 120, this is an extremely capable bike. It kind of just dominates over rough terrain. Going back to that locked in feeling, because you feel so locked into the bike, you can just throw it around. The confidence of this bike is so high, more than any other bike I've ever ridden. Like I'll do things on this bike that are scary on other bikes just because of the way that you sit in it. With the 120 suspension, I do think that is the setup that most people are going to be into. I have had it with lockout and without lockout. Right now I don't have a lockout, but I kind of want to add a lockout back in. That'll be a future video, don't worry. The reason I bought 2 of them was we actually didn't sell Specialized at the time, so I always try to have 2 race bikes. And so I had a 121 and a 101. And low key, the 100 Allied BC40 was so good. It turned the bike into one of the fastest bikes I've ever owned. Still kind of held on to its capable nature, but just increased the speed pretty dramatically. The flex stay on this bike, while it looks like the Epic Evo, it's a little bit more efficient. I mean, you can't tune this part of it. The bike definitely is a more efficient pedaler in the open setting. I also did try 110 with this bike, and I've honestly felt like that was the worst of all 3 configurations. It just kind of took away the speed and the capability at the same time. So I felt like you're gonna have this bike. I think most people are gonna want 120, but if you're a racing nerd guy and you want like a 100, the BC40 might be a really good bike to take a look at because it's kind of an underrated setup. One thing that I talked about on the Evo, it's not great, but it's still better than what Specialized had, is their cable management. It's actually like a 2-piece thing, and if you watch our build video, you can see that. And it's really hard to get it to sandwich together. Once it's sandwiched together, it works great, but the setup is hard. The seat stay on this bike is wider. And there have been people who have told me that sometimes they hit, it doesn't hit, but it's like a rubbing motion. That happens to me on mine too. Is it a deal breaker for me? Absolutely not. I didn't have it happen enough to where I was worried about it, but I just do need to say that out loud when people ask me about it. I would say, is it a problem? No. Does it happen? Yes. I love both these bikes, and everything I'm about to say is with the context of these are my number 1 and number 2 favorite bike of all time. So if I'm saying something negative about it, just understand that I absolutely love both these bikes and seriously do think of them as my number one and number two. I'll let you know which one. So we've talked about how the Epic suspension is squishier. Allied with their flex stay and suspension setup have created a little bit more efficient pedaling platform. Just that's why I don't have a lockout on it. It doesn't need it. I think that if you casual riding, like sure, it doesn't, I don't think it matters as much. If you're trying to race these bikes, the Epic Evo, I literally think it requires the lockout. I mean, you can race it without it, but if you want to be really fast, that lockout, oh man, it really makes the bike next level. The BC40 is less of a need. I would put a lockout on it again, and I might in the future, but just for all intents and purposes, I think the pedaling platform on the BC40 is more efficient than the Epic Evo, but I've corrected that with the lockout. This bike has to be 3-position. This bike, I would put a 2-position on. I had it with a 3-position, and the middle setting doesn't do anything because the open setting's already efficient enough. So I'm gonna call that a tie. If you have lockout, 2-position on this, 3-position on this, if you have the lockouts, you're set either way in terms of being ready for like an endurance race. Geometry. This is where these two bikes are very different, and the real meat of if you're looking at both these bikes and you're gonna decide which one you want, this is the part I would really make my decision off of. Whenever we were talking about the BC40, this bike, you feel like you're just locked into it. You feel like you're in the bike. The Epic Evo, you feel like you're on top of the bike. And what that does is being on top of the Epic Evo means that you're less connected, you're higher up off the ground, at least it feels like that when you're riding it, and therefore, in my opinion, it's sketchier to ride. Be more aware of the bike, and you might, I never crashed on either of these bikes that hard, but I definitely don't hesitate on this bike, whereas this bike I have to think a little bit. Even with the same, like I have a 125 dropper post on both bikes. This one, getting on and off at a race like Margie, I kept clipping my shorts on the seat, whereas that does not happen on the BC40. The BC40 is slightly lower to the ground, which is probably why it feels like that. Let's get some hard numbers. So the BB height on the Epic Evo is 336 millimeters. Allied doesn't give you that number. Dang it. The BB drop on this bike is 36. The BB drop on this bike is 40. So it's definitely lower to the ground.
Not ready.
Wow, excuse me. That was a big burp.
It was silent.
So the other major,
God,
I'm gonna die. Normalize throwing up. The other very noticeable geometry difference between these bikes is the seat tube angle. Both bikes have a 66.5 degree head angle. The reach on the Epic Evo is 436 and the reach on the BC40 is 445. The BC40 is 10 millimeters longer than the Epic Evo. For context, both bikes are size medium. I ride a size medium. Notice I have the same stem length on both bikes. So this is a 90 -17. This is a 90 -17. But that doesn't make sense, right? I have the same, this Epic Evo is 10 mil shorter reach than this bike, so why do I have the same stem length? It's because that BC40 seat tube is straight up and down almost. The seat tube angle on the BC40 is 76 degrees. Seat post angle on the Epic Evo is 74 degrees. That doesn't sound like a lot, but look at what I've had to do. They don't make setback droppers, and so look at this one compared to that one. And this is the same bike fit on two different bikes. You might be thinking to yourself, hey, Jesse, why don't you size up and get a large? Well, I don't like riding larges because the reach kind of gets too long and I don't want to run a short stem. Going to a large on the BC40 bumps the reach a whole 3 centimeters. I'd have to run a 60 mil stem, which is not something that I'm very keen on. The main reason I like mediums is I have really short legs and I have a long torso. Stack height ends up getting so tall on a size large for me. As I'm racing, it's very hard to keep the front wheel planted on the ground up these steep inclines that I find myself on at every single event that I do. We were just out in North Carolina, and grades that we were climbing up, I was able to keep traction with both bikes. Really, just having that low position, it is, in my opinion, just a faster way to set up a bike than having your handlebar be taller is not gonna help keep your wheel on the ground. And you don't have to set your bike up like that. I'm not saying everybody should set their bike up like that. That's just how I would prefer a bike, to hopefully answer that question for everybody. The standover height on the BC40 is excellent, and I definitely could stand over a size large BC40 if I needed to. They don't have that number. All of the rear triangles on this bike are the same. I don't know if that's the same way for Specialized. A size large Epic Evo, I don't have as much standover height on it. We already kind of talked about how that bike, you're already kind of riding on top of it, and so it kind of gets to the point where I already have a hard time swinging my leg over this one. And that's not here, that's here. Just making this whole thing taller make it even worse at the end of the day. The last kind of geometry thing that I think is important, the wheelbases on these bikes are very similar. This one is slightly wider. It's about 10 millimeters wider on the BC40 than it is on the Epic Evo. Not a huge deal, but I thought I'd just shout that out so people can know. One nitty-gritty detail that I think is really important is that this bike will fit 2 full-size water bottles. This is touching the shock right now, but with a bottle shift bottle cage, it fits no problem. And honestly, huge kudos to Specialized for figuring that out. Again, I know it's touching the shock, but it's just because I don't have a shift cage on here right now. If I had one that I could slide down, I've raced this bike with 2 full-size water bottles tons of times, and kudos. The BC40, still on top of it with the water bottles, you have 2 water bottles on this bike. Main triangle one is super easy. This will never fit a full-size water bottle here. The way that the bike's designed, they have this carbon strut that holds the rocker and everything, and so it doesn't really fit. And then I also want to point out, this bike has some issues with even this water bottle. Spots on my frame where it hits. So right now it needs to be adjusted down. So this bottle cage I need to move downward because it does contact the frame there. One thing I did to kind of help with this is put a little washer there. I know that you can correct this with the correct bottle cage. Actually, I don't think this is the right one for this. You need the Silca ones that are just cut out and you can slide it wherever you want. And I also have mist on the bottom and I've rubbed the paint off there. At this point, this bike's been through so much, I'm not super worried about the paint. I'm gonna give the win on the water bottle front to Specialized. I mean, very clearly you can fit more water on this bike than this one. The other thing that I will say is that Allied's BC40 is a sub 2,000 gram frame with the shock, or I don't know if it's with the shock, but whatever it is, this bike is just about, the Allied BC40 frame is just about as light as the Epic Evo. I'm not gonna weigh them today, like I said, it's not fair right now, but the Allied BC40 is barely heavier. I'm talking 50 to 100 grams. So they're about the same weight at the end of the day, which I think is awesome. So that's not really something I would be using as a bullet point if I was trying to consider both these bikes. They're about pretty much the same. Whenever we're talking about the price points on these bikes, Specialized makes lower tier models. I have the S-Works here right now, but you can buy this bike. They sell a complete, I think they called it the Epic Evo. You could buy this bike with some pretty low end, not low end, but mid-range parts on it, mid to lower end parts, for $4,000 for the whole bike. This S-Works frame retails for $39, and that's fluctuated around during the pandemic. This bike at one point I think was $45. I can't remember what it released price-wise, but Specialized has changed the prices a lot. Allied, right now, this frame set with a stock paint job, and when I mean stock paint job, anything that's just flat, matte, or gloss paint. This is a $43.50 with the shock, all the parts you would need. Same with the Specialized, it comes with all the parts you would need. Slightly more money, but you're getting the premium bike with Allied. There's no way to buy the cheaper one. It's a US made, and shout out to Allied. It's an awesome company. I got to go tour the factory whenever I went out for Ozark Gravel Doom. It was a great experience. So just kind of love working with them and how unique what they're doing is. You can get these frames painted any color you want. We've got some crazy paint jobs in, and it's super fun process to kind of pick it all out. The value for money, you're buying a premium product with Allied. There's no way to get this for cheaper than high-end bike, you know. Specialized, you have the ability to buy an Epic Evo for a more affordable price. So whenever we're talking about, like, if you're looking at which one to buy and your budget is just this frame alone costs more than that $4,000 complete Epic Evo. So there's an option for everybody with Specialized, and obviously they're one of the biggest brands in the world. Allied, if you're getting into a BC40, you kind of know what you're getting into. I don't think that's a positive or negative with either one, but let's say you don't have the budget for a BC40, like, just get an Epic Evo. Like, you'll be stoked. Don't worry about it. Some stuff I'd like to see change on both bikes. We need some steer stoppers on both of these bikes. I understand that, like, they're kind of these more capable cross-country race bikes, and all the photos you see are like short, like they ship with short stems, and that's great, but the majority of people who ride these bikes are putting longer stems on them. I'd say it's at least 50-50. Actually, let me take that back. Not the majority, but it's like a 50-50 thing. Like, you have two of the best cross-country race bikes ever made sitting here, and whenever I'm putting them together, like, my cockpit will hit both of them. And Allied actually put some tape on here. That came from putting it on the truck. It's never happened to me, but I've seen it happen to somebody else, and it just seems like, I don't understand why people don't like steer stops. I think it should just be a universal thing. I really hope that both brands put one in the next version of these two bikes. I think that Allied, with the benefit of releasing this bike 2 or 3 years after this bike was released, you can kind of feel like the progression from this to this. And so, yes, I think the Allied BC40 is a better bike than the Epic Evo. Understanding that this bike is the reason, understanding that the Epic Evo is the entire reason that the BC40. Without the Epic Evo, we would not have the BC40. And so, thank you, Epic Evo. I love this bike. It is one that we will remember for a long time, and I'm excited to see what the future of this bike is. I know Specialized has a 3-year product cycle, so who knows, we might be seeing a new one sometime soon. The BC40 is just a triumph of a bike. You have a brand making their first mountain bike ever and knocking it out of the park. I have not heard anybody who owns this bike say, and I mean, there's nitpicks about it. Yeah, the cable routing thing is annoying to set up. Sometimes it's hard to get the axle through the brake mount. Yeah, sometimes I hit my leg on the chainstay. None of that takes away from how amazing of a ride this bike is. I've never felt, again, I'm reiterating myself, never felt more connected, more confident. You're just in the bike and you're part of the bike. It's an awesome feeling, and kudos to Allied for making what is my favorite bike of all time to this day. We've sold so many of them. Everybody loves them, and again, kudos to Allied for making this awesome. So let me know what you think down in the comments below. I am very fortunate that I get to have both bikes, so I don't really have to pick, but if you were gonna pick, let me know which one you would pick. Definitely a hard choice, and again, I don't want to be unfair. The Epic Evo is the grandfather of all of these 120 bikes, and even though it didn't come first, it really was the one that, like, planted its flag in the sand, you know. If you're interested in inquiring about getting either of these bikes, the best way is to reach out via either Instagram or email. We'll have links to all that below. It's really easy to get in contact with us, and getting a BC40 takes a while. It's about an 8-week lead time. They make them to order, so if you order one, it goes into the queue for building it, and so it does take a while. Like, they don't just have these sitting there, they're making them as orders come in. Sometimes they do, and it's fast, but in our experience, getting a BC40 is about a 2-month process. To pick the paint and anything, I know they have paint on the website, but one thing that I kind of wish Allied would, like, put into their website a little bit more is, like, they will do anything you want. Like, Epic, it doesn't matter. If you just want a normal flat color and it's not on their like preset, that doesn't even cost more money. It's like, oh hey, I want a yellow bike. As long as it's not expensive paint, like they'll do it. I've seen some crazy stuff. And they'll even go crazy. They have an in-house guy, Luca, he does all the really fancy paint jobs that you've seen come out of Allied, and you can do that also. They'll work with you on it. Ordering an Epic is the same as just letting us know and we'll try to see if it's in stock. That is the downside of like getting an Epic. It's one of the most sought after S-Works frames, and we just went through this with the new Tarmac. If you want an S-Works Epic, you basically have to buy it before it releases, if you catch my drift. The model year on Specialized, it's like they only make a certain amount of S-Works frames, and once they're gone, you kind of have to wait for the next round of them. There's not really another way to get them. So getting an Epic, definitely, getting an S-Works Epic, you have to be a lot more proactive. But if you just want like the Pro or the base model one, just as long as it's in inventory, you should be able to get that one sent out, no problem. Thanks for watching this video, everybody. Let us know what you think in the comments. We try to respond to as many comments as we can. And again, thank you for everybody who's been supporting the channel. It's been growing a lot and we really appreciate it.